Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. Welcome, Antonia. Welcome back. How are you doing today?
I am very good and very warm, Graham.
Very warm. Yeah, my aircon has been going like crazy today as well. Today, we are joined by Emily Koehler, who is an engineering ops expert at Expel. Emily, welcome and tell us about yourself.
Thanks for having me. So I got into engineering operations through a bit of a windy road, like probably everybody does in their existing careers. I initially started out my education thinking I was going to work for the UN and would do a bunch of translation work, and then ended up somehow falling into tech. I really appreciated when I was in school being able to learn about agile concepts, and I started using a Kanban board for one of my first management positions. And from there, things sort of spiraled from like people management to project management to programs and engineering operations and eventually product operations as well. So I've definitely been in roles where I am a lateral contributor to a lot of operational topics. So planning motions, if you can imagine like the quarterly planning and all the logistics that go around that. Within engineering operations, you can kind of anticipate that to be your quality team, your incident management processes. Certainly the planning and estimation process is a collaborative effort between product and engineering. So, of course, engineering operations is going to be similarly a partner to product operations in that motion. And then you might also think about some of the automation and platforming work that is going to help a company eventually make life easier for not only their engineering counterparts, but also make it possible to speed up your product development lifecycle by having fewer, maintenance burdens over time, let's say. So there's a lot of overlapping concerns between engineering and product operations, and I've lived in both worlds. One of the things that I'm focusing on right now is decision making within the engineering and product org and figuring out what are some of the, let's say, related themes that can help us accelerate our product and engineering development together in a way that is sort of related to strategy, sort of related to execution, but all in one, its own thing.
Wow. Fab. Well, I mean, look, that's actually perfectly, lines us up to what we're going to talk about today, which is really getting some insight about engineering ops from yourself. Absolutely fantastic that you have had both feet in both camps over your career. It'd be really great to kind of hear about, where those differences and where those similarities lie. And in particular, I think, talking today about facilitating good decision making and again, really from your perspective of having, worked product ops and now in engineering ops as well. What does that look like on both sides? So over to you. Take us through your thoughts on some of this.
Absolutely. So I think that one of the most obvious things to call out just to begin is that when we think about decision making, it becomes significantly harder for people to do without the presence of a strong, well articulated strategy. So from the product perspective, if you're saying, hey, I need to tell the organization what's important and what's not important, which customers we care about and which customers we don't care about. Similarly, in engineering operations, our customers are engineering contributors. What is architecturally important to our platform? What patterns are acceptable? What patterns are not acceptable? What quality gates do we care about? What operational metrics do we think are important to focus on? Is it mean time to restore? Is it uptime? Is it, having triple or quadruple nines? From a technology perspective, there are a lot of sort of thresholds and goal setting and expectation setting that is similar to what the product team will do in terms of saying, this is what we care about and this is what we don't care about, such that you know how to get in where you fit in. In the absence of a very strong strategy, which I think most companies really struggle to articulate, even if they have a good one, they don't necessarily propagate that throughout their communications. They don't necessarily make it real for individual contributors. So at different levels of the organization, it can become harder and harder to know, when is it possible for me to contribute? What is the point of me doing it? Am I helping my organization? Am I helping the company? Why is the work that I'm doing relevant? So certainly strategy, I will say, is the ultimate helper in decision making. But in the absence of strategy or in the absence of, let's say, a well-articulated plan to disperse that throughout the company, there are still themes that you can operate in when it comes to decision making. So there's three kind of places where you see decision making really becoming important. The first one is business continuity and onboarding for staff. So let's say that, for example, when I worked at Dashlane, which is a password management company, they had a desktop application and they had mobile applications and they had a web app. The first week that I started, I was at a town hall where they announced that they would be sunsetting their desktop application. People were crying. People were upset. I had no idea. But obviously, this impacts people's careers. It impacts the performance management and the expectation setting that they have. I think in that moment, it's very clearly an articulated strategy that we are going to focus on mobile and web, and we are not going to focus on desktop. That was a well-articulated decision that was communicated. People really understood the impact really quickly. There are decisions that are similarly large that I see at either, Expel, my existing organization, or previous companies, where you think they probably should have written that down because new people keep asking and they keep getting slightly different answers from new people. So when it comes to onboarding, certainly having well-articulated documentation that allows for business continuity and a good, let's say, developer or employee experience is important. That's category one. A second category is, let's say, prioritization and trade-offs. So anything having to do with the planning motion. If I know what is good and what is bad, it is possible for me to individually within my specialization say, oh, we are going to go and only work on web. So if you're asking me to add new tests to this desktop application, or if you're adding me to add new monitoring for this desktop application, that doesn't really make sense. I can kind of push back on that logic. I can understand where I should or shouldn't be making an investment for my own team or for my own scope. And I can, either yay or nay a plan. And I do think that in terms of the business continuity piece, like having good documentation, professional development, and business, and like employee experience and prioritization and trade-offs, all three of these categories really rely on making it possible for people to be activated to make decisions. And so I think what I really want to talk about today is not leadership making decisions or people who are in a product role saying, this is what we're going to go build and this is how we might build it in terms of a design or an architecture. I really want to think about the people who are individual developers or engineering managers or product managers within a team who are meant to take the bits and pieces of context that they absorb and then go do something with it. They are expected to perform in the absence of full clarity through the ambiguity, as they say in Portuguese, like swimming through the mayonnaise. It's one of my favorite expressions. How can people swim through the mayonnaise and make decisions without full clarity? So this is what I really like talking about.
That's very interesting. I think better decision making is something that all enabling roles have in common. I think it's a goal for all of us that the people who do the work have the tools, resources, knowledge, direction they need to do that. But within that, I find it very interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on this. This interplay between engineering operations and product operations, and something that people are actually more familiar with than engineering ops, DevOps, right? How do all of these three roles harmonize? How do they all get together under this bigger banner of better decision making? And what is your take, having seen both product ops and engineering ops, between what goes where? Because often there are really two camps in product ops. Product ops is the overall thing, and then you have specialists underneath that. So you may have specialists for engineering, specialists for design, and so on, maybe even for data. Or you have an operational discipline, but then you have people who specifically focus and do only engineering ops, right? And I think, at least for us in Europe, the likelihood is large that you might be a solo product ops person, but you're being asked to dabble a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because I do think that if I'm considering our audience, a lot of these folks are probably a team of one, and they are similarly, let's say, influencing laterally across the organization. They don't necessarily have the decision-making power. They might be consulted. They might be informed. If we're thinking about a traditional like racy structure, they might even be accountable to making sure that the decision is made and gathering the stakeholders who have the information to choose a direction, but they are not ultimately the decision maker. I think that is the thing that sort of unites all of these roles, is that not only are they operating with less than perfect information, but they are also required to work very cross-functionally across the organization and consider both the technical needs as well as the strategic product needs that customers are expecting. while taking into account, like, let's say the demand of recurring revenue and, procuring new customers, while also keeping the lights on and managing incidents and handling all of the technical requirements that are needed to keep a platform up and running. So when you say DevOps, I think, platform teams that are expected to make sure that we have upgrades on all of our infrastructure. We are managing all of our vulnerabilities. We are responding to quality problems and defects. We are prioritizing all of that work in addition to the product roadmap, which, might consist of new features, enhancements to existing features, things like that. So it's really that trade-off. When I think about the interplay between these groups and the sort of, let's say, events or artifacts that they deal with together, certainly the product roadmap is one of those. And we know that how we make decisions about what to prioritize in terms of keeping the lights on and new features is a time-tested problem throughout the organization. I think when we think about articulating a decision in the product organization, there are some very well-tested templates and artifacts. So a product requirements document or a PRD might be something. You might have a project brief if it's more of a change management motion, or it's, let's say, an operational initiative internally to improve something like customer success and not so much a customer-facing feature that's external-facing. But within engineering, you have architectural decision records or ADRs. So that will document the requirements for what is expected out of a change. It will articulate the impact of a change. And within that process, it will also have evaluated the pros and cons of a number of options. So I think that, I want to say in 2011, Stephen Covey might have been one of the first people to produce, Stephen Covey was Rocks, Pebbles, and Sand. So certainly the process of evaluating the size and the effort of something is equivalent across. And that's part of the decision criteria, let's say, between an architectural standard and a feature prioritization. But effectively being able to articulate something in a document that is shared around and shared with the right group of stakeholders is really important. I think having a template like an architectural decision record, or not even an architectural decision record, just any decision, right? It could be a product decision. It could be articulating a strategy around development patterns. It helps improve outcomes because you're requiring less cognitive input from someone to think of all the things. Give me the context, give me the options, tell me the pros, cons, tell me the decision that ultimately you and all of your consulted stakeholders came up with, and then give me the impact. So it's giving us the continuity for people who are joining new to the organization. It's giving us rigor because we are showing that we've evaluated multiple options and it's not just someone's word or someone's expertise within the organization. There's no HIPPO problem, right? Highest paid person. And we are going to anticipate the impact or the consequence of the thing that's happening. So this is why I am a junkie for architectural decision records or decision records in general. There's a lower lift version of this, which is a decision log, which is basically articulating a much smaller range of decisions within, let's say, a given project. That can also be very helpful for continuity, but maybe not necessarily as much for stamping a decision in stone. So I do think that removing cognitive overhead and removing the HIPPO problem is part of what makes a good decision, and maybe not so much a fast decision, but it will certainly have been shown to have rigor.
Wow. So much to pick up there. I think one of the things I'm really pleased to hear once again, because we hear this actually more and more on this podcast, cognitive load and the importance of understanding it, the importance of what we do in an ops role. How do we reduce that down? Just the simple act of having a template for a document means that actually, we just need to consume and use that, not have to rebuild this every time, and then remember what it looks like. We don't have to necessarily copy and paste what came before or previous version, add it back in, delete everything. We just go, no, let me start using it. Let me consume this. Let me consume this as an asset, as a customer. Another term we use obviously quite a lot. So really, really pleased that that's being thought about in engineering ops, in other ops roles as well. So that's absolutely fantastic. One question I have: who are your stakeholders in engineering ops? So engineers, absolutely, and we're very much like in product ops. We work very closely with our product teams and our engineers and our designers, but also we have stakeholders around the other parts of the business as well, which are other leaders of other teams, sales, marketing, leadership, support. We have to be engaging with them. We want to be engaging with them to understand how does product or tech best interact with them and vice versa. So in your world, in engineering ops, who are your additional stakeholders?
That's a good question. In engineering operations, you're typically going to have that core team of contributors, which could be like site reliability engineers, so people who manage incidents, a quality team, maybe some kind of operational or like project management function. And you will also have automation or like, let's say, platform management folks. So if you think about that core group of technical contributors, there's necessarily going to be, let's say, like an architectural concern. So that could be a community of practice. It could be a staffed function of architects who are helping to define patterns that are acceptable, what the future of the platform should be. Like, do we want to have multi-region, for example? What kind of reliability standards do we have? What kind of, customer needs might we be evaluating in different markets? So let's say that we're primarily healthcare, we're going to go after security groups. You can kind of anticipate the sort of structures that will need to be fit in. And when you have a product that's 5, 10, 15 years old, sometimes you have to make the buy versus build decision. So architects are certainly a major contributor to architectural and engineering standards. And that is a big part of like decision making within the engineering operations space. Certainly the product team, and if there is a product operations team functioning, they're going to be a big partner to engineering operations because there is no decision making, there is no road mapping, there is no company that has a product without having really tight collaboration between product, which is defining the what and the how might we, with a design function. And certainly engineering is helping to say, okay, hey, these are the must do things that are required for us to maintain the platform, for us to consistently provide a level of acceptable service, if it's a service or if it's a product. And also understand really the point in time where you can no longer make a compromise with something. I think a lot of times the expectation from engineering teams is to just come up with a capacity plan. How many butts do you have in seats? How many staff are on call? How many people are responding to incidents? How many people can, help with a technical demo? These are tiny points in time, but realistically speaking, the engineering function should be informing the strategy based on what is realistically possible with your platform and what's not. So I think that certainly product ops and engineering ops are major partners, and then architects are also huge informants when it comes to the process of decision making in the engineering org at large.
Super interesting. And as somebody who's been in both product ops and engineering ops, and this might be a little bit of a mean question, so I apologize in advance, but what are the differences you perceived in working quote unquote for product people versus quote unquote engineering people?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that is extremely challenging in both is proving impact. Certainly being able to measure the impact of a change in your product and in the platform, or let's say the back end of your product, are very challenging. Because you have to make assumptions based on incomplete information. And this is where decision making becomes so important. We will say, I have an assumption that when I release this thing will happen. That could be an upgrade to software, or it could be a new feature or experience for a customer externally. So I think that within both, there is a demand to have some anticipation of the impact. But certainly, I think that within an engineering role, it is a little bit easier to get data on the operational effects of a change. So let's say that, we're upgrading some packages, we're upgrading software versions. We know that there are vulnerabilities that are getting fixed. We're probably not the first person or team to go ahead and absorb those changes. We understand what the change management looks like for that. We understand what the expectations are in terms of the SLA for doing that kind of work. With product, is a little bit more invention, right? You're coming up with an idea of what might attract a person or a customer, what might attract potential ARR, what might help implement a strategy. And you're effectively making more, let's say, inventive big swings. Not to say that in engineering operations you can't do that, but there are very well trodden paths to understand what the process is for responding to an incident, handling on call. And I think that the trade-offs are, let's say, more distinct, like they're more acute. We have a problem and we have to, deal with it in a shorter time frame. With product, I think that the time frame on which you're making decisions is potentially years. With an engineering, a lot of the time, you're talking quarters and shorter cycles. But certainly when we're, again, thinking about that capability, the longer term, where do we want to go? Engineering and product have the same concerns in terms of the decision-making horizon, let's say. So I will say, yeah, product is a little bit more loose, right? You have so many paths and there is no well-defined like must do. But certainly the thing that I found most challenging about both is like, prove it. Prove to me that this is the thing that we need to go do. Tell me what the RICE score is. Tell me what the impact is. I do think that product operations, teams tend to be a little more focused on that kind of a measurement, whereas engineering teams might have DORA metrics where you're saying mean time to restore or change failure rate, things like that. And it's interesting when you're looking at the types of work that you do as well, like in terms of projects. I'm not sure if I gave you a completely adequate answer, but I think those are the two things that pop into my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, that measurement piece is also what popped in my mind. I feel like the product work is quite intangible, right? We're trying to help people make better decisions, but we're trying to help them come up with new ideas. And we're trying to help them sort of foresee what a customer need might be or what potential solution might fulfill that need or that opportunity. So it's very, very loose, very nebulous. And then trying to measure product ops's impact on that can be very difficult. And it's exactly as you say, you have to build assumptions into that, right? We
Yeah.
are assuming that by doing XYZ, it will help us build better products. Whereas in engineering ops, and I'm not saying it's always the case, but I think you have slightly more tangible markers of effectiveness, of listen, we improved this, we had this engineering ops motion, and now we have a measurable impact on the engineering team.
Yeah, I think from a technical standpoint, that's very true. But I will say that the place where product operations tends to be a little more developed is in like the research motion, like understanding from a professional development standpoint or from a like meeting customer needs standpoint. There are so many tools and so many AI, generated tools as well that allow you to aggregate tons of feedback from customers, either from sales calls or from emails or from, your CRM platform. With engineering operations, you'd be lucky if you get a few people responding to a survey about your developer experience and what things that they think are important. So certainly in the work that I'm doing in engineering operations, it can feel like from a technical standpoint, you're like, I know how to measure this. But when it comes to effective decision making and let's say architectural decisions or architectural standards, it is very challenging to be able to measure it. So it's not always one-to-one. It's easier to, let's say, measure within engineering because for sure, like we want people to be in a place where they are allowed to fail. I think that engineering teams are stereotypically places where you can fail fast and you can run experiments. But at Expel, for example, we're a managed detection and response company with a 24/7 security operations center. We are not allowed to fail. If a customer fails, we fail and very bad things happen. Bad guys win. So the consequences and the stakes are very high, but I do think, I'm not sure if you've seen the TED talk from David, I want to say it's David Marquette, who did like turn the ship around. He was a naval officer and he had like 400 people working on this nuclear submarine. And he was dealing with basically what we now call decision fatigue. And he was the only person who was effectively thinking and making commands and calling shots for this entire sub. And what he did was he tried to turn it around such that they could pass an inspection within a very short period of time. He said, I need to activate all of these people to be able to make decisions, because if I'm the only one making decisions for this entire org, we're going to fail. I think that when people hear more folks making decisions, they panic because they go, no, 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 no. 20 people in a room, bad. 2 people in a room, good. I definitely don't want to advocate for increasing the number of people needed to make a given decision. But I do think that having an easier way, a more visible way for people to make decisions within their own realm of ownership is certainly a thing that we want to advocate for, especially within engineering teams, because they are ultimately the ones responsible for designing and solving the problems that will effectively make the product roadmap possible.
Again, there's so much to unpick there. Decision fatigue, is another absolutely brilliant avenue that we could explore, because from an ops perspective, from either of our ops perspectives, that's actually within our wheelhouse to enable those teams to make those decisions, to give them more autonomy, yes, but actually give them a structure that they can make a decision without necessarily needing or feeling even feeling that they have that autonomy, but they can still make those decisions. Obviously on a more detailed scale, but I think that's really important, and I think it's certainly something within, as I said, within our wheelhouse to be able to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thinking about the, let's say, career development or professional development theme, if you're in a position where you manage a team of, let's say, career level or entry level engineers or product contributors, let's say maybe there's someone who's a product owner as opposed to a product manager, or maybe they are, let's say, a business analyst, like they're sort of getting into one of these roles and they're learning the process. From a product operations standpoint, you would want to be able to challenge them with opportunities to make proposals, even if they're not making decisions. So let's say that there is some kind of a template for a project brief. Please articulate the problem that you want to solve. Articulate the theory that you have. A lot of the times when I am going out and looking for things that are actually interesting to me to work on, because there's the 80% and there's the 20%. The 80% is, again, using that phrase, keep the lights on, just do engineering stuff, do product stuff, make the things work. The other 20% is, I've heard a lot of people talking smack about this thing. Is it true? And I want to be able to do some research, do a little evaluation to substantiate if that's actually a real problem, or if somebody said something to someone who's important, who then said it out loud to a bunch of other people, and now we think it's a problem because someone important said it. This, for me, like proving that there is a problem before going out to make a solution, is one of the major things that product is responsible for. You cannot waste company time and energy on something that is not the right call, because we simply don't have unlimited resources. Similarly, within engineering, we cannot go say, people are bad at blah, and then roll out a tool that directly impacts blah, and then it's not the right thing. We similarly are constrained in our efforts. And so we have to be able to articulate, this is the thesis, this is the theory, but how can I rigorously evaluate the options for attacking this problem in a way that is socializable and also provides me with an opportunity to develop my skills of inquiry, my skills of analysis, my skills of implementation and change management, without being in a position where being wrong is going to explode my career, make me embarrassed, be a problem. So effectively, you have to be in an organization where you are allowed to fail. My boss had said something very prolific. I don't know where the actual quote comes from, but it was, first attempt in learning is effectively the acronym for fail. And I really loved that, because you need, in a professional development sense, the ability to try on decision making if you're going to ever learn to be in a position of leading people. Similarly, if you're doing it from a lateral influence in a product operations or engineering operations role, or if you aspire to manage large teams of people as a CPO or a CTO, you have to be able to fail, but we must demand some kind of rigorous showing your work in order to do that. I think that what I would hope organizations do is have some kind of agreement among all contributors that whether you're a CPO or whether you're that entry level business analyst, everyone has the same demands and expectations when they are making decisions to document their work, evaluate decisions, and be able to anticipate the impact such that change management happens and you're not living with a bunch of versions, let's say, of how things are happening in your organization. Because we know that just as much as users hate living in between versions of software, we hate living in between versions of, let's say, organizational design or operational expectation setting.
I'd like to pick up on that for a second, because so I've worked in companies with very strong engineering leaders, and I've worked in companies with very strong product leaders, and funnily enough, almost every single time, there was a conflict between engineering leadership, so engineering managers and maybe even above, system architect, like you say, and product leadership, because product leadership needed engineering capacity to get feature work done, and engineering leadership wanted to advocate for a better, more stable, more up-to-date platform. And it's that interplay between the sort of technical roadmap and the product roadmap that seems to be a recurring topic. And I'm wondering, is engineering ops or even product ops in cases actually the answer to sort of finally, untangling that and making sure that in both cases, like you say, the strategy is clear. In both cases, we understand what is necessary today, what is necessary this quarter or this year, so that we can run effectively as a company.
I think that that's a really strong proposal. I mean, you articulate it as a question, but I would articulate it as a proposal. I would propose that product operations and engineering operations teams wedge themselves in among the leadership group to say, hey, I love what you're saying. I love what you're saying. Have we actually provided receipts for any of these theses? Have we actually articulated the opportunity cost of doing one thing over another? I think the primary place where product and engineering operations folks have to be courageous, especially when it comes to interfacing with our leadership teams, is to ask for those receipts and to say, even if you decide to defer on maintenance, or even if you decide to defer on a product feature, you are ultimately making a decision by omission. And that is also something that we should write down. So it might be, for example, I am currently in a position where 20% of my time is maybe operational, but 80% of my time I'm working on a cloud migration, which is a great landing place for me to run experiments and for me to work on, let's say, ways of working and operational tooling that can improve the delivery of this motion. It's really great. One of the things that we've started using is a decision log, and that runs the gamut of all kinds of decisions. We will talk about when we have a staffing change, when we have a change in work management, when we have a change in our weekly events, or what some people call, ceremonies. We will talk about deferring work in favor of something else because we expect either a risk or some other opportunity to be worth exploring. Not every decision is gonna be those big negotiable, like, standoff moments between your CPO and your CTO. There are sometimes just standoffs between individual team members where you say, I don't want to wake up early to stand up. I don't want to consistently provide a demo deck. I would rather pre-record things and put things out there. So it's really being able to give people tools that allow them to articulate their needs, document the current reality, and have continuity for people across the board so that when you have a new person joining, when you have that layoff, when you have a reorg, people are not consistently in the frame of mind of having to relearn what they are required to do every day. I think that is the real benefit of having rigor around decision making. And it sometimes, like I mentioned, requires courage if you are demanding those standards from people at the individual contributor level, as well as, the leadership level, because it can be hard to tell someone, just because you said no to this thing doesn't mean you said yes to this other, you didn't say yes to this other thing implicitly by doing that. And I think that it's our job to do it, but it can also be scary to do it.
It's really interesting because there's two camps to that, isn't there? You've got the operational camp, the piece that you were saying there, do you want to put your updates out via Slack or a written piece, or actually do you want to do it as a video? Very operational. But you've also then got the decisions which are very fundamental to the strategy, what we're building, as well. And I think there were absolutely lots of different answers to it. I think on an operational, on a how do you work level, there's absolutely, we can push everybody down a particular route for standardization, and I don't think that's always a bad thing, because it gives an amount of comfort to the end users. An area that I focus a lot on is kind of how we are communicating to the wider business about what we're doing. And I'm very keen, actually, from a external of product or by technology perspective, we want to have a consistency because, at Helios where I am, we've got 400 odd people in our customer success team. We've got 400 odd people in our warehouse team. They don't know how many teams we've got. They don't care how many teams we've got. They just know, product is up. There's an update to the product, so I want to see that. And they don't necessarily want to have to relearn how to consume all of this because one team, wants to say it in one way, another wants to use a video, another wants to give release notes, another wants to do chapter and verse on it. It's very jarring for those end users. And I think we always have to keep in mind who those end users are when we are trying to suggest ways of working. I don't think that's always something that can be left to the individual to kind of on a personal preference level. But I'm really interested on the strategy side as well, when there is kind of that conflict between, what product wants to do and what technology or engineering is turning around. This is how we have to do it, or this is what we think that we should be doing. Different perspectives, ultimately trying to negotiate the right way forward. So diving into that, how does product and engineering ops help and facilitate in that perspective?
That's a good question. I think the primary place, we are facilitators. At the end of the day, we are people glue. We are required to force people into conversations and take them out of Slack threads because that is the only way that we will get things done. I think that we can also set standards and expectations for how people behave in those situations, right? If you work in a culture where it is not acceptable to fail, you have to be able to give people grace and somehow add a filter on failures, right? You have to be able to give some kind of leeway for people who are hoping to speak out, but maybe aren't feeling comfortable in that scenario. So, do you do some asynchronous information gathering such that you can present it for people on behalf of them back to them? I think that is often a very interesting way of, let's say, repitching a problem to the people who are aware of the problem. Can be interesting to have it given back to them. I also think that there is a sense of, let's say, democratic fairness that is required within organizations to be able to say nothing about us without us. If a person is articulating an interest in doing something, they're articulating a priority and they're making a case, I want to know that they have done their due diligence of talking to their stakeholders about whether or not that is the right call. If I have an engineering leader who has not consulted our architecture team or has not consulted our reliability engineering team on making a change, and they are simply accepting, a request to build a new feature because it gives us money, that is not a particularly strategic call. We make those calls because companies need money to run, but I think that we have to at least acknowledge when we do those things that they are not meeting the strategy. And so for me, I think that having some kind of a prioritization framework, typically within engineering or let's say product operations, like a RICE framework or some kind of product scoring, is going to be the way of maintaining that standard of inspection within engineering operations. We will also have, let's say, architectural standards or engineering contribution standards to say, we are not going to go over this threshold of maintenance. We are not going to go over this threshold of incident response. We are not going to go over this threshold of, let's say, maintenance burden or quality burden per team, because we simply know that that is not a viable option for us because it would put us into, an emergency situation. We don't have capacity for it. So I think in my mind, that's where my mind goes, is being able to basically set the standard for what an articulable decision or proposal looks like. And some of that's through templates, some of that's through frameworks, some of that's popping up in your, let's say, quarterly planning motion, or it's coming up when you have a big opportunity that arises. So let's say, one of your competitors goofs and you have a moment to seize an opportunity. Do it, go do it, but do it writing down what you think is going to happen before you go do it, such that future you has the gift of looking back without judging past you on all the things that you didn't know and then feeling a certain type of way about it. I think that continuity is really a kindness that we can do ourselves as contributors in any organization, because past us is always going to be very jealous of what present us knows, and present us needs to be nice to past us.
Love that. I think that's applicable to life in general as well. There is one thing I really have been meaning to ask you. How can product ops help engineers?
I love that. I think that within the prioritization framework or within the, let's say, product requirements documentation structure, within your decision making structure, within your prioritization framework in general, have a line item for maintenance, have a line item for expected engineering burden. I think that engineering costs are considered people. It's the engineers in seat. How many people do I need to build this thing for the duration of the product launch? But we do not necessarily think about the, let's say, architectural complexity that we're adding that makes it harder to service existing features and customers. And I think also when we think about a maintenance burden or tracking the actual cost of engineering implementation, we have to think about what's the 80-20 Pareto analysis for features that actually make us money and features that drain our resources and waste our time getting woken up in the middle of the morning for noise. I think that kind of analysis of the product roadmap is very smart when you say we only have so much time and energy. Let's really constrain our decision making and our prioritization to the things that we know are going to make an impact. And we're going to go talk to our architects. We're going to go talk to our reliability team. We're going to go talk to our engineering operations team and say, which one of them is not really used or asked for, but somehow has a major maintenance burden because it's running on 4 versions and a deprecated system from an engineer who left 4 years ago. It's that kind of a thing that I think could be really great for product and engineering operations to talk about. And it's not necessarily something that you see a line item in when you're saying, give me your product pitch, like what's the engineering cost or what's the maintenance burden? I think any engineering team would be very happy to have that conversation.
I love that. What a fantastic nugget of wisdom.
I genuinely think there's so much here, in that relationship between product and engineering, that relationship between product ops and engineering ops, as a rapidly forming new layer within the business, like other ops roles as well. That interaction, and how do we ensure that our respective camps are playing nicely together, but it's thriving together as well? How do we do things like that? How do we make sure that product is thinking of engineers much more than just a resource? How much engineering hours have I got in this sprint, in this quarter? Actually, well, what are the things that they are bringing to the table, and why, and what's the impact, what's the value of these things as well? I think is just absolutely fantastic. We are absolutely out of time today, so I would firstly like to thank our very special guest Emily for everything that you have shared today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
We absolutely have as well. Is we love these new perspectives, these new twists on what we do on kind of day in and day out, and actually widens our thinking. So absolutely, thank you very much. Please do connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Everybody watching today, and Antonia and I will look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of the Product Opscast.